There's no place like home. No place like home. No place like home. Dorothy, tell that to the homeless. Rome wasn't built in a day. Tell that to the people who spent the last 50 years roaming, yet have never seen the promised land. If you can't admit how discouraging that must have been, then you're not being honest, man. It's 2019, so let's keep it 100 then. I spent $38,000 on student loans because I refused to lower my expectations for higher education. We get into debt to get out of poverty because ain't no such thing as a free lottery. Let's keep it real. Where do we go from here? Absolutely nowhere if we're just going to get there and sit still. You know how some folks get when it gets real. They complain, then they take a seat on the fence like the bus is filled. Rosa Parks didn't just sit down because she had on heels. They said righteous, keep it family friendly, but what's the use? Because ain't nothing friendly, fam, about a noose. Brown souls die early because of how powerful we'd be after graduation. Now that's the true meaning of brown versus education. They killed an innocent man because progress was going to be such a devastation. That's why I care less about Golden State and more about state senate, because some cops don't care about your windows anymore as long as your face tinted. But I show all cops respect, and I never play the race card unless someone put it in the deck. It's an eternal defeat. Humanity's been tricked for so long, we forgot how to treat. This life isn't all sunshine, it's ugly to say the least. So don't paint these kids the beauty and leave out the beast. See, some of us need sobriety tests because we're straight out of line with those free my homie t-shirts and free my homie signs. Like your homie didn't just commit in prison my homie crimes. I'm angry because 50 years later I turned on the TV and couldn't tell what year it was. I really don't see color when I look at Alyssa, Kaylee, and Brittany. I see lovable friends who decided to walk this hateful journey with me. When I'm in the voters line, I'm reminded of a time when they bred us with us, mating mothers with sons, fathers with daughters, and vice versa, just to increase the number of slave workers. And it makes me sick to my stomach to think there was a time we couldn't identify as humans, only as numbers. See, we've acquired new hate from old love, and blacks are killing each other too. So the only time our race truly comes together is when we're hanging in cold blood, blood, blood.
Wow, let's hear it again for Righteous Soul. Powerful. Welcome to the National Civil Rights Museum for our conversation around the intersection of race and sports. I'm Elliott Perry, former NBA player, local minority owner of the Memphis Grizzlies, board chair of the Grizzlies Foundation, and a proud member of the National Civil Rights Museum board. This weekend, we celebrate and remember Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and what he meant to this community. I pause to tell a personal story because I think it fits with what we're all trying to accomplish. Many of you know my grandfather marched in the 1968 march, and those guys who hold the I Am a Man sign. And I always remember after that time, walking from Mason's Temple to the National Civil Rights Museum, I would walk with my grandfather after Dr. King was killed. And what I'm reminded of is I sit at a seat, or I sit at a table that's been prepared for me, and I think we all sit at a table that's been prepared for us. And I know that I too have a responsibility, but we need to continue to hold our young people accountable, that they too have a responsibility. I share this quote of Dr. King's when he was opposed to war in Vietnam because I think it meshes with what we're trying to do today. And I want to read it for you. It said, "We're now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We're confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. Procrastination is still the thief of time, and life often leaves us bare naked and dejected with a lost opportunity. The tide in the affairs of men does not remain at flood, it ebbs, and we may cry out desperately for time to pause in her passage. But time is adamant to every plea and rushes on. Over the bleached bones and jumbled residue of numerous civilizations are written the pathetic words, too late. You see, there is an invisible book that faithfully records our vigilance or our neglect. Before we start our program, I would like to take this time to recognize a few individuals in attendance with us this evening. For 14 years, alongside the National Civil Rights Museum, the Memphis Grizzlies have honored individuals who have had significant contributions and laid the foundations for future leaders through their careers in sports, in the spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It is my pleasure today to introduce this year's recipients of the National Civil Rights Museum Sports Legacy Award. Our first recipient, Chris Bosh, an 11-time NBA All-Star, an Olympic gold medalist, two-time NBA champ. Off the court, he has received a Community Assist Award and the founder of the Chris Bosh Foundation, which support organizations by raising funds to help youth in academics and athletics. With a nice left-hand jumper, too. Our second recipient, Wayne Embry, is not only a 5-time NBA All-Star, but an NBA Hall of Famer. He also made NBA history as the first African-American general manager in 1972. In the community, he is a member of multiple nonprofit and corporate boards of directors. Our third recipient, WNBA champ, who is participating with us tonight on the panel, Candace Parker. She is the only player in WNBA history to win both Rookie of the Year and an MVP award during her rookie season. Off the court, she is active with numerous organizations, including the March of Dimes, DARE, the Ronald McDonald House, and a member of the Pat Summitt Foundation Board. And finally, Bill Walton was the only player in the NBA to win NBA MVP, NBA Finals MVP, the NBA Sixth Man of the Year award. He has won 2 NBA championships with the Portland Trail Blazers and the Boston Celtics, and is involved in over 50 charities, and has also been a recipient of the Oscar Robertson Leadership Award. And he also had a big game against Memphis State back in 1973. You know I had to bring it up. Please join us in welcoming all of our Sports Legacy Award recipients. Before I introduce our host and moderator of this evening, I would like to give a special thanks to all of our partners and sponsors. The Ford, Federal Express, Ashley Home Store, and the Hyde Family Foundation, whose continued support make this celebration possible every year. And now, to lead us in our discussion around the intersection of sports and race, please welcome our host for this evening, President of the National Civil Rights Museum, Terri Freeman.
Thank you, Elliott. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the National Civil Rights Museum. We are always excited about this particular program. We will be celebrating Dr. King's 90th birthday on tomorrow. And this partnership with the Grizzlies and this particular forum is always a highlight of the weekend for me. And I am thrilled to be able to introduce our panel this evening. We have Garrett Temple, who is the small forward and shooting guard for the Grizzlies, a graduate of LSU and vice president of the Players Association. We have Candace Parker, who you've already heard about, WNBA champion, WNBA Finals MVP, two-time WNBA MVP, and two-time Olympic gold medalist. We have Grant Hill, 7-time NBA All-Star, and a 2017 Sports Legacy honoree. And Marc J. Spears, the senior NBA writer with The Undefeated. Welcome. Now, dictionary.com defines intersection as a place where two or more roads meet, especially when at least one is a major highway. So this evening, we are going to travel down the highway of sports and make a couple of stops at the crossroads of race, gender, and communications. So let's jump in here. My first question, for whomever wants to answer it, as an athlete, you have been provided some unique opportunities, but I'm certain that there are obstacles. You know, we as non-athletes look from the outside in and everything seems to look perfect to us. But we know that there are some challenges. Can you tell us a little bit about the challenges? Garrett, you want to start?
Yes, first of all, thanks for having me. There are challenges. As you said, a lot of people, especially with the social media age, you put things out there that may look rosy, but we're humans just like everybody else, and we go through the same challenges everybody else goes through, whether it be relationships, whether it be self-doubt, things of that nature. So when it comes to playing our sport, when it gets to this, when we're at this level, it's a job as well. It's not, you know, I have a quote, basketball is what I do, not who I am. So I live a life. I have a life, I have family, I have relationships, I have a God that I believe in. And, you know, we do this thing called basketball in my case, that's just a part of what I do. It's not everything. So I think, you know, after a bad game or things of that nature, you still go back to your real life. And the challenge is trying to make sure you separate the two. In my estimation, that's one of the big challenges for us.
Candace?
Yeah, I think we have a responsibility to show people that we're more than just basketball. And, you know, as athletes, as he said, you know, we have this platform, and, you know, I don't know how many jobs are out there that you can go on the internet and see how much somebody made or how many points they had the night before. And you have families that have to live with this as well. I mean, I'm a Bears fan. The kicker, he still has to live in Chicago after something like that. So I think we look at the positives, but also you have to weigh those with the negatives. I love my job. I love what I do. I play basketball. I mean, we were talking about this back there. We put a ball in a hoop. That's what we do for a living. And so you got to keep it in perspective. But there are positives as well as negatives.
Grant?
Yeah, I mean, just to continue with both of their thoughts, I mean, it's a great job and something that, you know, I enjoyed every minute of it. But yeah, I mean, I think the visibility, I think the fact that, you know, everything you do is dissected, it's analyzed, it's scrutinized. And most people don't have that kind of, you know, where you can come and the whole world can watch what you do on a daily basis. And, you know, there's good with that, but there's also bad with that. So just finding, you know, as Garrett said, that balance, not losing perspective, not getting sort of too high or too low with the ups and the downs, maintaining a core of people around you that can hold you accountable, who can be honest and real with you, but also can sort of help you from getting caught up in the ebb and flow of the wild and crazy sports season. So, you know, there's many greats, but there's, you know, there's sacrifice, there's, you know, sometimes dealing with family. I mean, there's a lot of things that I think we all can kind of relate to and maybe in some ways have experienced. But, you know, by and large, that's life. You know, life, there's always going to be ups and downs, and you just learn how to get through.
Yeah, okay, Marc.
Well, I was going to say this.
Well, he played at UDC.
Yeah, so
I saw him play in college.
Yeah, he don't remember it though. So I told him we don't have to talk about my piddly college basketball career. I told him he saw me dunk once. He said, "Well, you must not have dunked too much if you remember that." But I knew what my calling was. My college basketball coach told me if you cared about basketball as much as you do that goddamn journalism, you'd be a hell of a player. But I was honest with what I was going to be. But also know that the pen is now the computer, and the computer is very powerful. And I take my job very seriously. I'm blessed to not just write about who's may get traded, or if somebody got in a fight in the locker room, or or anything like that. Like I'm not talking about anybody here, but
You're looking at Garrett.
I got messed with Garrett a little bit. But with the Undefeated, I get an opportunity to write about stuff that could potentially be trend-changing, maybe life-changing, bring a microscope to things that people don't want to talk about. So I take a lot of pride in that.
Well, when you're a public person, I think it's really important that you protect your soul, particularly when we are living in an age where social media kind of puts you out there. So it really is important for you to protect your soul. Marc, let's just talk about you for just a minute. The Undefeated is actually dedicated to looking at this nexus of race and sports. From your vantage point, what are the things that you like to write about? What are the stories you want to tell?
I like writing about the uncomfortable, writing about things that, why you got to bring that up? And I get a lot of that. I've got my share of hate, for things and everything. Oh, I got to be racist all the time because it needs to be talked about. I think one of the things that I'm very proud of, or actually sparked things, I interviewed Mr. Lloyd here. Earl Lloyd's the first black player in NBA history. I got to interview him in Tennessee, in Crossville, Tennessee in like 2002. And that kind of like sparked the fact that I got to interview the first black man in NBA history, the stories that could come in that neck of the woods, and knowing how powerful the pen could be. And I think recently the thing that really touched me the most and showed me how powerful it could be is I did a series about the lack of black executives, general managers in NBA. And there was one or two. Now there's, about 6. You got black owners. And I had a longtime executive who came up to me and said it so some other reporters could hear. Like, thank you for writing those stories, because maybe if you didn't write that, nothing might have happened. So it showed me that there's a lot more that I need to talk about, and to have pride in what I get a chance to do that honestly a lot of reporters may be scared to write about.
Those stories are so important too. Many adoring young fans, they think all I need is talent. As long as I'm good, I'm good. But I'm sure there's more to it than simply talent. Grant, what do you think is one of the things that's most influential over your career beyond talent?
Well, talent certainly helps, but there's a lot of variables involved. I think, I do think at the end of the day, I think character is important. And, you want a locker room of character, not characters. And, but as we talked about, there are a lot of things, a lot of pressures that come your way, a lot of expectations, a lot of money. And I think if you can, I think the ability to manage all that and to understand and not lose focus. I know from a team's perspective, you can see talent. We all can go on the internet. We all have access now to all the players that are out there. But now, what are those factors that are going to separate them and differentiate them? Are they going to get to the NBA and all of a sudden get complacent? Are they going to continue to push themselves and try to become the best version of themselves on the basketball court? And so those are the kind of qualities I think teams are looking for. And I think those qualities are what separate the Candace Parkers and the Chris Boshes and the Bill Waltons, players who have something in them, have a certain character, a certain belief system that's necessary, not just for success, but just for survival, to be able to endure and get through and have a successful career.
Candace, would you add anything to that?
I would add that, you learn perseverance. I've had 7 knee surgeries on each of my knees, and I tore my ACL when I was 16 years old. And I remember when I tore it, I was crying, I was upset, I didn't know what to do because all I knew was basketball. And my parents came into the room and they were like, you have tonight, and then tomorrow you pick yourself back up and you work to get back. And so I think once you develop that perseverance and that character, as Grant spoke about, and that work ethic. I mean, a quote that rings in my ears, I played for Coach Summit, the late, great Pat Summit, that changed the face of women's basketball. And she did that by saying, you have never arrived. You've never arrived at your destination. And if you have that mindset, you keep working hard and keep building, then the rest is history.
So Garrett, what or who has influenced you along with having that talent? What has been an influencer?
I think it would have to be my parents, mother for sure. Can't leave her out with my father in particular. Like Grant said, I think the character that they, put in me when they were raising me allowed me to have a work ethic, allowed me to be able to persevere when I got cut. My dad used to always say, one of his sayings that he got from his father, you can't get ahead staying in the bed. And another one he said that's very powerful, my oldest brother actually just wrote a book about it. He said, think like a master, work like a slave. And that was something that was just continued to be put into myself, my older brothers, and now my little sister's minds. So when things happen, you continue to just fight through it. You continue to work. You wake up at 5, 6 in the morning before you go to school to work out because you have a goal that you want to get to. And my mom always says, how you do one thing is how you do everything. So whatever you're doing, whether it be playing basketball, whether it be writing a paper, whatever it may be, do it to the best of your ability. And I think a lot of that has to do with the type of character a person has, how they attack whatever they're trying to do.
Okay. All right, let's talk about this mess called society nowadays. I think you all would probably agree that the state of our nation is not so harmonious right now. We're living through a time when our communities are divided. Political ideology is a driver of some of that division. Challenges to hard-fought civil rights persist. You all just went through the museum and you saw what people fought for, and we know that there are folks fighting against some of those things now. The lack of economic equity and limited access to opportunity is yet another issue that is facing our communities. That said, sport is often seen as the great unifier, has the ability to unite people. Do you think that, in fact, sports are a unifier? And if so, does this ability to unite go beyond game day? Who wants to start?
Candace under the WNBA probably doesn't agree with that.
Well, Candace.
Just put me on the spot there. All right. I do believe that we are playing in two leagues, and I say that in the NBA and the WNBA, that allow their players, or their players have made themselves aware of social issues. And we're always at the forefront of social activism because we are representation of the minority, of women, of people of color. And so I do believe that the playing field unites, but then what happens when you step outside the lines? That's where this generation, I think, has taken a big step forward in having these conversations. And I think this generation, this time, has taken a step forward in the listening. I think that's what needs to improve a little bit in order for us to really have the conversation. Because if two people are talking, nobody's listening. And so I think sport does unite, but once you step outside of the lines, what are we doing to really bring positive change outside of your uniform? Because when we go back to society, when the ball stops bouncing, who am I when I'm not a basketball player anymore? And so I think that's the question that we're all asking ourselves and continue to have that conversation.
Now, are you asking who you are as society sees you, or who you are as the sport sees you after you?
As society. Because I think that's the thing that is going to continue on when the ball stops bouncing. And everybody here, I mean, Father Time, it doesn't wait for anybody, as we've seen with our idols. Kobe Bryant's not playing, basketball anymore. And so you have your idols that start to slow down a little bit, and you see, like, after basketball, what is it? What world are we leaving for our kids? And I think that's where I've gotten a lot of motivation from our NBA brothers and our WNBA sisters that have stepped forward and really tried to change things.
And I was going to tell you, I'm kind of alluding to the pay thing, which is, but I really respect the WNBA players because although they're not getting paid anywhere near what a lot of their NBA brothers getting paid, they've kind of been on the forefront of speaking out. You know, Minnesota Lynx, your team, different WNBA teams have made statements about race and things that need to change. So I strongly respect that. And then, you know, guys like Garrett have kind of been on the forefront too. Like every player isn't comfortable going out front. Like when Stephen Clark, I don't know if people here are familiar with that story, the kid was killed in his grandmother's backyard in Sacramento last year. I mean, he led a movement in Sacramento. So, you know, I have a lot of respect for, I think Chris might have been on the team when you guys wore the hoodies. I mean, it takes a lot of guts to do that because I know everybody's not comfortable doing it. So I have strong respect for the athletes who actually have the guts to use their voice and their platform because many don't.
Garrett, you want to speak to that?
Yes, I think sports are, you know, like natural disasters in terms of unifying. But once, like Candace said, once the game is over, what happens next? I'm from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Saints fan through and through, so I'm really hurt right now that they just lost the way they lost. But obviously, Louisiana, melting pot of people, but has history of, you know, racial injustice, obviously. But at a Saints game, all different kinds of people are going for the Saints. But when the game is over, you know, what happens with those relationships? Do the cops still look at a 16-year-old black boy through a different lens than his mom does? And I think until we get to the point where that unification goes beyond the game and outside of the lines, like Candace said, then honestly it may just be a Band-Aid. And until we get past that and find tangible change, whether it be through sports or something else, then you know, we're not really solving a problem.
Grant, you have any ideas with regard to this, you know, during the game, it's all good, but once you step off the court, things can get a little dicey. Any suggestions on what we could do for that after the game time situation?
You know, I don't know if I have any suggestions, but I do think, you know, I think sports can play a role. It's not the magic elixir in terms of fixing racial issues in our society, but you know, I do think the impact of, you know, right now we're in this technology information age, and you can have access to the NBA, the WNBA. As a kid, I remember you had to go to the USA Today and read the box score the next day. But now kids have all this information, and the majority of the fans, at least in our country, are white, and you have a predominantly African-American sport. And so when I see little, you know, Caucasian boys and girls following players in the WNBA and the NBA, and sort of the relationship as a society that we have with athletes, it's like almost a hero worshiping in a way. I do think it moves the needle a little bit, not maybe at the pace that we want, but the impact that it has. You know, a 10-year-old little boy who sees LeBron James and admires him, and LeBron, you know, using his platform and comfortable talking about. I think that has an impact, and it may not be felt right away, but I'm optimistic that it will be felt, you know, at some point down the road. So, you know, I think sports can play a role in terms of what we can do. You know, I just understanding that sort of thought process. I love that this generation, not just in the WNBA, NBA, but all sports are comfortable speaking out. And, you know, I'm not making an excuse for my generation, Elliott and I, but it was a different time in the sense that you didn't have access to all this information. So if I lived in Detroit and something happened in Cleveland, unless I really worked at it to educate myself and be informed, I wasn't aware. And now we have access right away through technology. And so I think the sharing of information, the access to information, and then, I have an 11-year-old daughter who is unbelievably comfortable being in front of a camera and being on. And I think you have a generation of athletes who are comfortable with that as well. And so, whether you're LeBron James or whoever, I think they're accustomed to having a platform, to having a voice, and now sort of processing all that's happening, being able to speak up on it. I think that does have an impact, and I think down the road it'll affect that next generation coming through the pipeline.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about your public platform, and Marc, this is for you as well. You do have this platform, right? Almost in some ways a bully pulpit for some people. What are the issues that are important to you? How would you use your power to push forward different issues? And Marc, why don't we start with you? I mean, because the pen is very powerful.
Yeah, going back to that uncomfortable thing, I kind of sit around and think about what could I mess with next. I got a story coming up. I've been working on it for over a year. I was so happy to put send on it about like what it's like to be black playing for the Boston Celtics. And I've done what is it like to be white playing in the NBA, a white American, not European, white American playing in the NBA, a Muslim in the NBA. So, a lot of times I get hate. I actually had a situation recently where the FBI had to get involved because I said something about a player that people in Canada didn't like. And so, it really showed. I didn't think people cared what I had to say. And I learned real quick. I mean, I don't have their followers. I got close to 500,000, and that's enough, I have to be careful on social media and this, that, and the other. But if there's something that I feel like is necessary, needs to be said, or something that needs to be written, I think it's my duty to say that, because my job is also different than all the other NBA writers at NBA and ESPN and most NBA writers. I could push an envelope that most of them can't. Or I actually heard recently that 30 of the players from Clemson decided not to go to the White House. And I maybe shouldn't be saying that publicly yet, because I think someone's working on that story. But there was one reporter who was told by an editor, "You can't do that. We don't want to go there." And that's the beauty about being at the Undefeated. We'll go there.
Candace, what are the issues that are really important to you, and how do you use your platform?
Well, I think you guys are probably one of the first. I'm a woman, so that's kind of a huge issue. Not an issue, I would say an issue that I'm attacking.
It's a good thing.
It is. I was 11 years old when the WNBA started. Up until 11, my two older brothers were my role models, and Michael Jordan, the Chicago Bulls, I grew up in Chicago, they were my role models. But then it didn't really turn for me until I saw people like me playing a sport. When I saw young women like me playing basketball, that's when it really changed. And, the league has gone through its ups and downs. We've gone through our growing pains, but I think, it's important for us to understand that the WNBA is 22 years young. We're battling against franchises that have 60 and 70 and 80-year histories of recognition, of fans, of generations of grandparents saying, I'm a Celtics fan, that your grandson, you're going to be a Celtics fan. And so I think that's the forefront of just making sure that I leave the game better than I came into it, and ensuring that my daughter has the same opportunities as my nephew. And so that for me is what it's about, and just growing the sport, growing what it's like to be an African American, wanting people to aspire to be an African American woman. I think that's important.
I want to piggyback on that, but I want to ask the NBA players. There is definitely, it appears that there is a difference between the NBA and the WNBA. even if you just look at the participation in the audiences. How can you guys help promote what the WNBA is doing? Because, my experience with the WNBA is that, frankly, their games are super family friendly, lots of fun, lots of energy, but unfortunately, the audiences are often, a fraction of the size of the NBA. We won't even get to the money question, but how would you all support increasing that support for the WNBA?
Well, it's kind of interesting because I went to LSU, and LSU has a very storied basketball history, women's basketball history. I used to go to the games when they played against Candace and Tennessee all the time, and it was packed, and our games would be, 75% packed. And so, real talk. So I would go to places, or they get paid so much more overseas. I would find places that are doing it right and figure out some things, talk to them about some things that they have that may be different than the WNBA is doing. But personally, I would push. If I'm in a city that has a WNBA team, I'm going to as many games as I can. And as the Players Association, we do as much as we can, and we need to do probably more. We don't do as much as we need to. We need to do more in terms of supporting the WNBA Players Association in any way that we can, whether it be pushing product, talking about what they do, because it's not like we're competitors at all. They play during the summer, we play in the winter. We play basketball. We love basketball. They love basketball. And as players, if you ask most NBA players, most guys know good basketball, and we love watching them play because they can hoop. So at the end of the day, maybe just being more outspoken to the followers on social media about watching them. But honestly, I think a big thing would be to show yourself at the games and let them know that you're going to watch women play basketball because it's cool. They can hoop.
Yeah, no, I think one, just showing up and being present. I have two girls who are athletes and love basketball. Now they have their mother's height, so they'll never be Candace Parker. But for me, it was having women role models and giving them access and exposure to that. And even now, as they're athletes, one plays basketball, one plays soccer. Like even at the high school games, our boys' team at a high school is terrible. And it's packed. And our girls' team has won the state championship 2 or 3 years in a row, and you can't get people to show up. And so my wife always says, well, if the boys are playing, then the girls will come watch the boys. But I just, it's good basketball. It's played at a high level. It's a good team, and I think people like, being associated with winners. And that to me is a problem. Same thing in soccer. In Orlando City, the soccer team is not that great, but the women's team, has stars. And it's the same. So I see it, and it frustrates me. I do think having athletes show up, be supportive, social media, use their likeness, guys in the NBA can be helpful. But, full disclosure, I've tried unsuccessfully to buy 2 WNBA teams. And because I think one, there's an opportunity there to add value and to really come in and on an ownership level and try to be creative. But I think it's a great sport. I think it's great talent, the best women players in the world. I'm a fan. I've watched Candace beat up on the Phoenix Mercury. I used to live out in Phoenix all the time. But I don't know. I don't really have the solution in terms of sports in general, but you see it across the board.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate, but I think if we can just continue to be supportive, outspoken, I think that'll certainly help.
I'll say this, I apologize to you, because us NBA reporters need to pay more attention to you guys too. I'm not going to use the excuse I live in the Bay Area and they took away the Monarchs. I'm not going to use that excuse. I will invite you to sit down and do something with me. I do a kind of like a GQ, kind of like Esquire piece, like what I've learned. I love to know about what you've learned since you've started watching the WNBA. So I'm going to try to do a better job, and I'll try to implore some of my colleagues as well, because we could the seasons overlap, and once, y'all go to like August now, and I want to just go hide under a rock once it's over. But they're playing great basketball, and we got to get more women to watch too.
Right.
Which,
Exactly.
but I'm gonna connect with you, and I'm at least gonna make my media effort to do better.
Thank you. And I think there's a role for the audience too. We have the Tigers at University of Memphis. There are Lady Tigers too. So I would encourage all of us to support the women's sports that are in our hometown, because these ladies can play. Yes, they can play. All right, I want to ask a question. I want you all to speak honestly. What do you think really sits at the intersection of race and sports? Or do you not see race as having a particular impact on the role of athletes today? Go ahead, Garrett.
I think race has an impact on the role of athletes in our sport, definitely. Honestly, at this point, it may sound crazy, what Marc said he wrote a piece about white Americans in the NBA. They may be looked upon, discriminated against by GMs or coaches because they're white, and they may not be as athletic, even though the stats or these things show that they can jump just as high. They just can't be as athletic. But on the flip side, the general managers, the coaches, the owners, the percentage of each honestly should, if not coincide with what the league is as a whole in terms of 70% African American, it should at least be more than it is today. So I think in that regard, race definitely intersects with sports, and it needs to get better. It definitely needs to get better. I mean, there's so much history in terms of sports idols having such an impact on society and social injustice in society. You look back at, Bill Russell, Muhammad Ali, these people speaking on big time issues, and it's something that needs to be talked about. And we have to, the way I was raised, you're obligated to use your platform to speak about something for people that don't have as big of a voice as you do. So I definitely think race and sports definitely have an intersection, and we have to do even more than we're doing in terms of trying to right the wrongs.
Candace, what do you see?
Well, I'd like to add, stereotypes and gender to that intersection as well. I think that precedes a lot of things. As you talked about earlier, when we saw somebody white, they're a shooter. When we saw somebody, African American, they're athletic. But now this generation, that's not this way. Right. You see it. You can see through social media, through everything that you turn on YouTube. You see Matt McClung jumping over people. Right. You see Steph Curry holding records for three-point shooting. So now we have this intersection where the stereotypes aren't matching up. And we've reached a point where now you're not put in a box anymore. And so that's kind of a conversation you talked about, that we have to change the way that we look at people and the conversations that we have. And we're starting to do that. And, whether it be representation in the league or whether it be representation within executives, GMs, owners, I hope that at some point those numbers will start matching up.
Yeah, I think when you look at the NBA, and I think we have a very progressive league, at least in terms of comparing to the other leagues that are out there. Yeah. But there's still a tremendous amount of room for growth, and whether it's at the ownership level, which I think in a way speaks to sort of the bigger issue, income disparity that exists in our country, but I think that's an area where because at that level now you start talking about rules, you start shaping the narrative, you start really having an impact on the game and on the sport at that kind of level, and we need more representation at that level. Marc talked about general managers and people who make decisions on the basketball side, and it's almost like we've digressed. We had a point maybe 10 years ago, I think we had the numbers were higher, and it's almost like this pendulum swing where it all became about numbers and analytics and this perception that we are good with numbers. And so, and I'm hopeful that swing will come back because, I think we have a lot of very capable and qualified candidates out there, but, we're reflected well and represented well on the court, but I think the area for growth, to me, is off the court, on the business side, on the ownership side, and maybe not, ideally to get sort of the same representation that we have on the court, but my thing is it should just reflect what society says, and if anything, and we're not there at that bar yet, and we have ways to go.
Now, from the media side too, I think I'm happy with how things are progressing, and then I'm disappointed because most of the black writers either covered NBA or covered NFL. I like to see more, not only black writers, but women, Hispanics, and we got this brother just started covering the Colorado Avalanche. I was so happy. He loves hockey. And I was like, good for you. Like more in baseball, but the one thing that we need is more behind the scenes. Like, okay, we can have a whole bunch of people of color covering the games and covering the athletes, but like, I remember 15 years ago, I tried to write what it's like to be a white American basketball player in an NBA story, and my editor, who was white, changed my words so it wouldn't seem as real. But now, that's the problem. We still don't have enough people of color who are behind the scenes editing stories, giving story assignments, saying, hey, that don't sound right. Maybe we should go back. So hopefully that changes where you see more sports editors, producers, women, people of color, different sexes. It doesn't matter. You need everybody at that table when that story assignment's getting put out, or when that, that might seem a little racist, we shouldn't do that, and that's, I think, the problem in the media right now is we don't have enough just complete representation. It's sadly mostly a bunch of, non-like Bill Walton white dudes, not as cool as him, making these decisions behind the scenes.
Yeah. And that's when inclusion is so important, because it adds so much to the overall equation. All right, on tomorrow, we are going to present the Sports Legacy Awards. What would you like your legacy to be? Grant, I'm going to start with you.
Oh man, that's a tough question. I think at the end of the day, I think through this amazing journey that I've been fortunate to be on, that it hasn't changed me for the worse. I'd like to think I'm a good person. I'm helping to others. That's a tough question. I haven't really thought about my legacy. I'll say this. You know what? I think no matter what you do and no matter what you accomplish, I think if your children can turn out to be productive citizens, if they can be good people, if they can have, the values and the qualities and the characteristics that, that are important, then I think that's your lasting legacy more so than anything you can do.
Okay. Marc?
I hope it is someone that wasn't afraid to jump on the grenade. There's some things that I say or have written or brought notice to that a lot of people don't like. Perhaps it gets me fired one day for being, and I'm not, dang, I shouldn't have said that, but for being too open and honest and pushing too many envelopes. But when a day does where I do stop writing, I hope somebody says, hey man, at least he pushed to try to change things, and I would appreciate that.
Garrett?
Well, like Grant said, that's a tough question. I've been trying to get my answer right the last couple of times, like Candace is probably right now.
Hey, can I speak?
And I don't
Can I
have-
say something for him?
Sure.
You say that for me.
I mean, you were a Duke boy. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, there you go. There you go. There you go.
I mean, this guy right here. You know what your legacy is?
What's my legacy? Yeah.
Nobody gave you nothing, man.
No.
This dude was undrafted. How many years you been in the league?
I'm in my ninth year.
Nobody picked him.
Yeah.
He got drafted I mean, I'm no.
But I will say my parents gave me something.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's what made me get to the point I'm at now. And I want, you know, like Grant said, he wants his daughters to, you know, grow up and be successful and great citizens. And I think that's, if I'm lucky enough, blessed enough to have kids, that's what I want. Don't have any yet, but that's what I would want to pass on, for them to understand what it's like to be a good person at the end of the day. And that's what I want my legacy to be. You know, people to say he's a guy that was a good person. He stood up for what he believed in, and he treated people the way that they should be treated. And I think that's probably what I want my legacy to be.
Great. Candace, I'm going to give you the last word.
Wow. All right. Well, to kind of piggyback off what Grant talked about, I think your legacy is what you leave behind your children and what you instill in them and the type of role model that you are for them. I hope that, you know, I always choose to be happy, because I do believe happiness is a choice. And, you know, I'm writing a book, so eventually you guys have to get it, but it's presence versus presence. And I hope that, you know, in that I'm able to give my daughter presence, but also always be there and experience life with her. And so I think that's the most important thing.
Well, these are some strong voices. There was something that resonated for me throughout all of this, and Grant actually started with it, but you all have ended with it. It's all about character. It's about who you are when nobody's watching, right? It's about how you treat the least of these. And through your comments this evening, I believe that you all's legacies are going to be in really, really good shape. Thank you for being here with us this evening. I hope you all have enjoyed this interview with these incredible individuals, incredible human beings who are writing their legacy and showing us how we can do it. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.